It wasn't all that long ago that a groundbreaking study was released called the WAVES study that looked at relieving menopausal symptoms in women. And they did it in a very interesting way. You're talking about changing your diet, making sure that that fat is really low. And then also, one very, very interesting addition to the diet: soybeans. The results so fascinating that there was a second round of data, a second round of research that was done. And today we will be discussing that hot off of the press with one of the lead researchers. He is the author of Your Body in Balance. He is a friend to the show and the president, of course, of the Physicians Committee. With that, we welcome Dr. Neal Barnard back to the exam room. Sir, good to see you again, and congratulations on the release of the study.
Well, thank you, Chuck. It's an important thing. It's an important thing, and I really appreciate you talking about it with me.
Well, I'm very curious because I know how excited you were for the first round of data that came up. What's new with this second round of data? What do we know now that we didn't?
When we did the first round, it was very striking to me how powerful this effect was. You know, women have hot flashes. For some, that's no big deal. Some don't have them at all. But women who have them, you know, they're waking up 2 or 3 times a night, just soaking in sweat, changing their pajamas, only to have it all start over again a couple hours later. And during the day, they can have them, you know, sometimes 2 or 3 a day, sometimes up to 15 or more than that a day. Really a terrible thing. And what we saw in the first round was that this combination that you just mentioned, it's a vegan diet, plant-based diet, very low in fat, plus the soybeans, half a cup of soybeans. It really knocked down the hot flashes. The moderate to severe hot flashes dropped by 84%. That is huge. However, even though that was more than enough, that we had enough participants to show statistically this is not chance, or very, very unlikely to be due to chance. There were certain questions that were lingering. And the first one, Chuck, is a kind of a real no-brainer. We did the first study in the fall of 2020. And I was really surprised by how strong this effect was. And I thought, is it because it's getting cooler? You know, maybe that's the reason they don't have hot flashes so much. Maybe it's just because it's fall, it's turning winter, and maybe that's why their hot flashes are going away. And that question came up, say, with some more importance because some people in the control group who were not treated found their hot flashes getting a little better too. So I thought, I'd like to do this again, but in the spring when it's getting warmer, because if it's getting hotter outside and your hot flashes will still go away, that I think would be a big thing. So that was the first thing. And the second thing, Chuck, was there was something that we didn't do in the first study. Your gut microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, for some women, they will convert these natural compounds in the soy, the isoflavones in the soy. They'll convert them to a special compound called equol, E-Q-U-O-L, equol. And the thought was, that's the thing. It's the equol that's knocking out the hot flashes. And some people really believe that to be the case. But we hadn't tested equol in the first round. So I thought, all right, I'm going to take microbiome samples from everybody. I want to see if they can make equol. And then I want to see if that makes a difference. And if that's the whole explanation, that's what we're doing. So those are the big motivators for doing the repeat study.
And what did you learn about the equol? Was it the big granddaddy everybody expected to be?
To my surprise, Chuck, no. And the reason is it wasn't necessarily that it didn't matter, but what we found is that the diet change was so powerful that women who produced equol, and by that I mean they have the gut bacteria that are making equol, their hot flashes pretty much disappeared. And the women who didn't make equol, their hot flashes pretty much disappeared too. So the equol itself wasn't really the explanation. Whether you made equol or not, this combination of vegan, low-fat, and soybeans just knocked the hot flashes out. And the overall result, by the way, putting it all together, was that 88% of the moderate to severe hot flashes, the ones that wake you up at night, 88% of them were just gone. So there we are. I had my money on equol, and it really doesn't matter, at least in this population.
Silly kind of housekeeping question here. Obviously, we're talking about a second phase of the study. These are completely different participants than you had in the first the first set of trials, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We started over. We brought in a whole new group of people, and they were starting at square one. They had hot flashes that were driving them crazy. They were randomly assigned to either do the diet changes or to do nothing. And we kept in touch with both groups over the 12-week period.
And in terms of the effectiveness of the dietary changes here, and the effect that they had on menopausal symptoms, the results pretty much mirror themselves in the first and second set of trials, correct?
Yeah, they did. And that's really important because in the end, combining everybody, we had 84 participants in the study. And one reporter said, well, don't you want to do a bigger study? And I realized that a lot of maybe reporters or lay people think that a study should be huge. It should be thousands of people before you can rely on it. And if you don't mind, Chuck, I'd like to just maybe address that really quickly.
Of course.
If you have an effect that's not really huge, something, does vitamin C help prevent colds or something like that? And let's say it leads to a 10% reduction, and it varies a lot from person to person. You need a fairly large study to show that there's a real effect. But let's say you have a study that shows something really dramatic. In some cases, you just need a very, very small group of participants to show it. If you show that the dead shall rise, or whatever it is, if there's something just dramatic, you don't need a huge sample. So we do a technique called power analysis that takes the expected effect and the amount of variation you're expecting from person to person. You crunch those numbers, that tells you the number of people that you need. And in this case, we weren't too sure going into the first study how many we'd actually need, so we arbitrarily brought in 38 people. But that turned out to be way more than enough because the effect was so strong. And then your statisticians crunch the numbers and they say, what's the likelihood that this could have been just a chance finding? And you come down to 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, and then you call it statistically significant. So 84 participants is far more than you need to show that there's a real effect here. So we didn't do it again just because we needed numbers. We did it again to answer these scientific questions.
Absolutely. And I think that is an excellent point. And, journalists probably aren't the only ones who are wondering that very thing, because a lot of times you hear about a meta-analysis, which combines data from multiple studies, and then you get these sample sizes in the thousands. But you're absolutely right. When you're seeing results time and time and time again, even in a smaller sample size that are so extreme that really doesn't leave much to question, that data is just as solid as you were saying as a study that has 3, 4, 5,000 participants in it.
Yeah, that's right. And with observational studies, for example, at Harvard, they have the nurses' health study and the health professionals' follow-up study, the physicians' health study. These are great studies. They're observational, and altogether they have hundreds of thousands of participants in it because they're teasing apart many different things with their diets and their health over a long time. So that's appropriate. If you're doing a randomized clinical trial, you are zeroing in on a specific thing with a research method that can tease it out with far smaller numbers of people and much more rapidly.
All right, so let's talk about the methods that were being tested in the study here versus what the traditional course of treatment is for a woman who is experiencing these menopausal symptoms, specifically hot flashes. I believe what we've talked about in the past is that so many women, I mean, we're just talking thousands and thousands and thousands of women, if not more, are on hormone replacement therapy. So that's a big difference from what it was you were looking at in this trial, correct?
Yes. Well, with regard to effectiveness, the effectiveness is about the same, which is a surprise because, so many people, in fact, for many, many years, women have been told, go to the health food store and pick up a supplement of black cohosh or genistein or something like that. And they would take it and it wouldn't do very much. And so this was not putting the pharmaceutical products out of business. However, putting this combination together, it just knocked out the hot flashes like a drug. So the effectiveness is pretty similar. What is so different, Chuck, is the risk. If a woman goes to the drugstore and she gets hormone replacement therapy, it's typically a combination of estrogen and a progestin. And she takes it home and she reads the little package insert. And it will say you're at a higher risk for stroke. She'll think, well, my grandpa died of a stroke. I don't want that. And then it'll say, and you're at higher risk of a blood clot, deep vein thrombosis. And you're at higher risk for dementia. And at that point, she just sets it down and says, I'm really not sure I want this at all. And then it goes further. You're at higher risk of breast cancer, you're at higher risk of a myocardial infarction. So she'll call her doctor and he'll say, well, yeah, those are all risks, but that's mostly for people who use it for a really long time and they use higher doses. So I'm only giving you a little bit. And of course, we'll have to stop it in a few years. And then she thinks, well, why am I taking this at all if I have to stop it in a few years? And Chuck, there was a study that it was published in Lancet in 2019, and they had looked specifically at breast cancer. And the numbers were that there had been about 20 million cases of breast cancer in Western countries since about 1990. So between 1990 and 2019. And they said that about 1 million of those cases they believed were caused by hormone replacement. So the point I'm making is that these risks are not trivial. And while it makes perfect sense to minimize the dose and to have it for a really short period of time, I mean, the shortest period of time is 0. And the smallest dose is 0. If you can do this with a more natural means.
Right. And so then it brings me to the question about, well, now we know that you're prescribing in this particular study a low fat plant based diet. And the research that you and I have talked about now for many seasons on this show goes to show that eating that type of low fat plant based diet can actually reduce your risk of all of those conditions you were just talking about. So that's another big victory here.
Well, menopause is exactly the time when so many women are reassessing their health. They feel like, I'm going through so many changes, and what can I do that might help me to maybe lose some weight? Because now I feel like I'm gaining weight more easily than I was before. And then they're talking to their doctor, who's measuring their cholesterol levels with more vigilance. They're thinking about, as I get older, maybe this is a time when I might be at higher risk for breast cancer. And of course, that's true. And I'm starting thinking about my cognitive health. And this diet that you're using to knock out hot flashes happens to be exactly the diet that you would prescribe, because a plant-based diet with soybeans reduces breast cancer risk. The high soybean intake reduces breast cancer, as you and I have discussed, maybe about 30%, something like that. It reduces the risk of heart disease. It reduces the risk of all of these things, and is likely going to reduce the risk of dementia, according to the best evidence that we have. So all the side effects are good ones. And even if a woman didn't have hot flashes, this is a good diet to be on.
And just a couple more questions here. I want to talk specifically about those results in the press release that was sent out and crossed my desk. You said, and I quote, "We do not fully understand yet why this combination works, but it seems that all 3 of these elements are in fact key. Those being avoiding animal products, reducing fat, and making sure that you're eating soybeans as well." If you take one of those out of the equation, did you test for that, or was it all 3 and then a complete placebo?
It was all 3 and versus, no, I wouldn't call it a placebo, because the women just didn't get any treatment at all. However, in the course of the study, what we did notice is that some women were getting in effect really fast. By fast, I mean within 5-6 days. And often these were women who did the diet very carefully and without any kind of messing up a little bit. By the way, being vegan is surprisingly easy for women who have never thought about this. Being vegan is easy. Having the soybeans is remarkably easy, because women thought, I never ate these before, but I cooked them up, and they go just like pine nuts on my salad, or I blend them into my smoothie, or put them in a soup. And women found lots of ways of having them, and they really liked them. Some of them would have them toasted like dry roasted peanuts. It's like a snack. So they found that cool. But Chuck, the hardest part, the really tough part for some of the women, was the fact that we would reduce fat content. And which is a funny thing, because grains don't have really much of any fat. They have a little bit, not much. Beans have almost no fat. Vegetables have almost no fat. That's true of fruits. The whole reason why it's hard to reduce fat intake is because factories that are making your vegan pizza or your vegan lasagna can't resist dumping oil into it, or frying things, or something like that. So our culture has really steered us toward a lot of added fat that Mother Nature wouldn't have had for us.
Yeah, and the surprising thing now in my years of eating a plant-based diet is that once you're able to eliminate that and start doing a little bit of cooking for yourself, you don't miss that oil. You don't miss the fat. And as a matter of fact, when you do indulge and you eat something, at least in my experience, that has it, you kind of get this sheen inside of your mouth. It's like a oil slick in there, and you're like, that is not nearly as good as I used to remember it being. So and just something interesting there, but that's a topic for another show.
Well, but Chuck, let me rip off that for just a second, if you don't mind, because I think you're
For
right.
sure.
And the first thing is there are some people who are just making a small change in their diet. They're going from, say, whole milk to skim milk. And at first, they do not like skim milk at all because it's watery, kind of blue colored and everything. But because it's lower in fat, it doesn't taste right for about 2 weeks. And then after that, their taste buds have actually physically accommodated to that lower fat taste. And then if you give them regular high fat milk again, they will hate it. It tastes like cream. You think, wait a minute, your whole life it was fine. Now you can't drink it. So your taste buds adjust. And just as you're saying, that you come to prefer that cleaner taste. The other place where you discover it is when you're washing your dishes. You're washing up and you notice this doesn't take any time at all because there's no grease on anything. Until if there is some recipe or something that you're having where you're noticing the spoons and the plates are greasy, kind of like they were when you might have been a meat eater or something like that, that's not only just an index of how much trouble you got to go through in the kitchen. That's also a sign of what's happening in your body. That same greasy stuff that's on your spoon is now in your esophagus, in your digestive tract, working its way into your coronary arteries too.
The greasy spoon, not just a restaurant,
Exactly.
not just in your kitchen, it's inside you as well, my friends. And my final question to you is this: what other questions are still left lingering there? What is still unanswered that you would like to shore up a little bit?
Okay, well, there are two things. One is some doctors have said, well, wait a minute. To get an approval for a drug for hot flashes, you focus on women who have a lot of hot flashes, 7 or 8 a day or more. And they'll say, well, Dr. Barnard, you really allowed women to come in as long as they had at least 2 hot flashes a day. So they thought maybe that's not as good. The reason we did that is we wanted to take women who had the normal experience of hot flashes, whether they had a few or had a lot, how did it work? And there we found that 88% of all hot flashes were or the frequency was dropped by 88%. However, we did a sub-analysis of those women who had at least 7 hot flashes a day, the more frequent ones. And the question was, would this work as well within that group? Because that's the group that the FDA wants to target. And we didn't have a huge number of women in that group, but we had enough that we could do some statistics. And the answer was their hot flash frequency dropped by 93%. And if you can imagine what it feels like to be a woman who's getting these whacked in the head, 7 times a day or 8 or 9 or 15, we had some just very, very frequent. And to have them drop by more than 90%, it is like, it's just such a wonderful treatment. So one thing we could do is we could bring in more women who have just these very, very frequent hot flashes just to satisfy any critics. But the other thing really, Chuck, I mean, we've already proved that it works. What I want to do now is I want to look at conditions other than menopause that cause hot flashes. A woman has been diagnosed with breast cancer. She goes to see her oncologist, who knows that estrogens are pushing that cancer. And so the doctor wants to do something to stop her estrogenic function. As soon as they do that, her hot flashes just come out and she's miserable. And she says, well, can I have HRT to knock out my hot flashes? And the doctor says, are you crazy? That's going to make your cancer progress. So she's got a fan. She's got the air conditioning up full blast. And she's got nothing else at a time when she is panicked and nervous about her own survival. I would like to use this dietary intervention for people who have hot flashes as a result of medical treatment, because it would be really good to see if it works. If it does, it also happens to be exactly the diet that women with breast cancer want to adopt for reasons of managing their cancer or reversing their cancer to the extent that they can. Plant-based, very low in oil, and have the soybeans every single day. So those are things that we want to tackle. And just maybe one last thing. There's been a really terrible drama in Japan. As you know, the diet has been westernizing for years. And what we've seen is that in Japanese populations, where there was really virtually no hot flashes back in the 60s, 70s. I mean, if women had them, they were rare. Probably 80% of women, 85, never had them at all. Then as the diet westernized, they got them quite frequently. When researchers look at young Japanese women, I'm talking about women of 30, 35, they are not eating the way their great-grandmothers ate. It is not a rice-based diet with lots of tofu and vegetables and little or no meat and no dairy. They have gotten this message that you need dairy, you need meat, you need all this stuff. You need to eat the way Americans eat, especially if they're involved in sports. They're told, you eat like those Americans. And these women have far more hormonal imbalances and problems than their forebears had. So I would really love to do more investigations, frankly, of the populations that taught us about this in the first place, to see if maybe going back to a more traditional diet or going beyond to an entirely plant-based diet might help them too.
I think both of those are fantastic ideas, and I would absolutely love to see that come to fruition and see some data out there, because those are both fascinating things. And I think that, as that, but it's not just the hot flashes. I mean, as you were talking about, you look at what happens when that standard American diet or that standard Western diet infiltrates what had been a particularly healthy country. You see what happens there with all kinds of illnesses. Just my lay hypothesis here, I don't see any reason why you can't replicate the kind of success that you saw in the study here, the WAVES trial. I don't think that, there's any reason why you couldn't see that kind of success applied to other conditions as well. So,
yes, exactly.
I'm waiting with bated breath, my friend. So
great.
Let's make that
You'll
happen.
be the first to know.
All right. And by the way, there's a link for you to check out the study for yourself right now in the episode notes, as well as an opportunity for you to pick up Your Body in Balance, Dr. Barnard's latest book, where you really had the opportunity to go in depth about all kinds of hormonal related conditions. I mean, that book was nothing but hormones.
And in a funny way, that book actually inspired this study. There was a woman named Betty who read that book around the time the pandemic began. And she read the menopause chapter, and she got in touch with me, and she said, I put your recommendations to work, and my hot flashes were gone in just a matter of days. And to tell the truth, I was surprised by how quickly the results were there, because I didn't expect it to be that strong. And so I actually made her tell me exactly how she interpreted what I had written in Your Body in Balance. She said, well, I was exactly vegan. I didn't have any animal products at all. I kept oils really, really low. And I had soybeans. And so I said, tell me, what brand did you use? She said, I got Laura brand soybeans from Amazon. How did you cook them? I cooked them in my Instant Pot. How long? 40 minutes. And she told me all the details. And so based on her experience that was so profound, I thought, well, we really need to do this study. So that's why we did it. And we actually tested Betty's diet as our model. And I'll be darned, it turns out to really be very, very effective. And a number of people have heard about this, and they've heard about it on the exam room, and put it to work and said, I was really skeptical. How can something that easy be as effective as a drug? But Chuck, you see this all the time. You talk with people who have done Dean Ornish's diet and other things, and they didn't really think that these results could be as strong for them as they are for the people in the studies, but they are, and it's so encouraging to see.
It's a great thing when that happens. And be on the lookout. The next big diet is, in fact, the Betty diet. Dr. Neal Barnard, again, congratulations on the release of the study here. The findings are just so extraordinary. So I know that it's going to help so many people out there who are struggling right now with menopausal symptoms. So you truly have, and the team of researchers there, just done an amazing job. And I thank you for carving out a little bit of time for us here today.
Sure. Thank you, Chuck.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well, and help to make your world a healthier place.